up as well, and that's why we want to do this. A couple things I forgot to mention: there's a survey form in each of your packets or on the things on the tables. Please fill those out if you have a chance, and let us know how we're doing and how we can improve these programs. Also, you each have a name tag. There's a reason for that. It's not so I can look at it. It's so you all can look at it. This is about networking too, and getting to know, getting familiar faces, putting names to faces, and hopefully we start seeing each other more at more meetings and things like that. We're going to start doing more of these over time, and so again, hopefully we'll have an opportunity to get to know each other a little bit better, and we'll know who each other are. All right, second part of the portion here. We are very, very
for them. I'm supposed to address some of the constitutional aspects of what they said. I will do that, and then take any questions you might have. As virtually all of you know, the Constitution was set up as it created a federal government of limited powers, of enumerated powers. James Madison said that the powers of the federal government are few and defined; those of the states are broad and indefinite. And that general situation held for a very long time until the Supreme Court started to permit the federal government to get a lot more expansive. But Obamacare represents probably the most ambitious and most intrusive thing that the federal government has ever done, and probably is unconstitutional even under the current expanded Federal Commerce Clause jurisprudence. And the reason I say that is that Obamacare doesn't just regulate commerce or regulate the economy. Obamacare forces people who are not engaged in the economy, not engaged in commerce, to become engaged. The best way to think of this is a constitutional analogy. Congress is given in the Constitution the power to define and punish piracies on the high seas. For the Obama administration to argue that these mandates are a regulation of commerce would be like arguing that Congress can punish Carl Graham because he's not a pirate, by the same sort of reasoning. And that is why two courts have done what very few courts do very often, and that is strike down the mandate as unconstitutional. We have another unprecedented event, and that is the fact, and it was alluded to earlier, that a clear majority of states are now either in the Florida lawsuit or in other lawsuits litigating against Obamacare. This has never happened before. We've never had a situation where the attorneys general of a majority of the states have actually gone to court to declare a federal law unconstitutional. And of course, they do so with good cause. Now, some people try to communicate that there's something a little bit odd or a little bit unusual or even perhaps a little bit extreme about the states pushing back at the federal government. That is, of course, not true. The founders created in the Constitution a series of checks and balances. And you probably learned in school about the checks and balances between the legislative and the judicial and the executive branch. But the founders saw the tension between the federal government and the states to be at least as important a check or a balance as those among the three branches of the federal government. The record on this is absolutely clear. John Dickinson, one of the greatest founders, at the very time that the Constitution was being considered, said that it will be the duty of the state officials to resist the federal government if it exceeds its constitutional authority, and if the federal government gets away with invading the jurisdiction of the states, it will be the state's own faults. Alexander Hamilton, you can't think of a founder who is a stronger advocate of a strong national government than Hamilton, and yet he said in The Federalist that we can depend upon the states to keep the federal government within its constitutional boundaries. And James Madison not only said that sort of thing, but in a series of papers that he wrote, extending from 1787 all the way down to 1830, he outlined the various techniques for pushback, or what he called it, interposition, ways in which the federal government, ways in which the states could stand up to the federal government. In 1992, in a very famous Supreme Court case, a very important case, which held that the federal government could not commandeer the officials of the states, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman to ever sit on the Supreme Court, said the Constitution divides power between the states and the federal government, not for the benefit of the states, not for the benefit of state officials, but to preserve liberty. So what these gentlemen were doing in outlining for you, of course I should turn off my own cell phone before I start speaking, shouldn't I? What these gentlemen were doing in outlining their proposals is outlining ways in which the states can push back to preserve liberty. All of these go under the general pattern of interposition. Some of the most important ones, Representative McLaren's Health Care Freedom Act is a good example. Similar laws have been adopted in other states. Basically are statements of non-cooperation, statements that whatever the federal government does, the state will not be cooperating with that. Well within the kind of actions that Madison recommended. Another kind of interposition was not represented here today, and that is, you've probably heard about that, nullification. Nullification is where the state actually makes a declaration that federal law is inoperative within its boundaries. There were one or two nullification bills presented to the legislature. They did not get out of committee, and I think rightfully so. They were not among the kinds of interposition that Madison and others supported or that are well-grounded constitutionally. But all the ones you did hear about today are. There is one other kind of pushback I'd like to mention very quickly because I think this is going to be a significant issue in the future. Senator Whittick, who was here today, had a bill along this line, and he had to change it, and that is the device of the Convention for Proposing Amendments, or the Article 5 Convention. I'd like to say something about that because there's been so much misunderstanding about it, and because chances are, I would say, in the next 10 years, we're going to see a convention for proposing amendments. And so this is the kind of pushback or interposition that Madison thought was the ultimate tool that the states had, and probably the most important. The Constitution provides for its own amendments. And it says that all amendments have to be approved by 3/4 of the states. However, in order for the states to get a chance to ratify an amendment, they first have to be proposed. And the Constitution provides for two separate ways of proposing amendments. One is for 2/3 of both houses of Congress to propose them, and the other is for the states to propose them through an instrumentality of the states called a Convention for Proposing Amendments. The reason the founders, including Madison, put into the Constitution this way that the states could propose amendments is because they foresaw a time when Congress might abuse its power or exceed its power or become corrupt. And they felt that it was very important for the states to have a mechanism by which they could secure a clarification of the Constitution or an amendment of the Constitution to rein in Congress. Many people believe that time has now arrived. The Convention for Proposing Amendments is a meeting of the states. The delegates are selected according to how the state legislatures specify, and it is a drafting committee which presents proposals back to the states for ratification. This was all well understood until about 50 years ago, when a group of people who were opposed to the use of this process were very successful in injecting into the public discourse a number of misunderstandings regarding the process. The Convention for Proposing Amendments is not a constitutional convention. It is not a convention that can change the ratification process. It is bound by the agenda that the states set. The reason I mention this is because what the founders foresaw, we have seen coming to pass, and that is that Congress is refusing to reform itself. Congress has had a number of opportunities to pass a balanced budget amendment. Congress has refused to do so. And so at some point, we can look forward, I believe, in a fairly near future to the states themselves collectively taking this problem in their own hands and amending the Constitution in a way so as to rein in Congress. So I commend these proposals to you. One thing that I'm sure that that all of the senators and representatives would love to see is bodies down in Helena, support at committees to support their legislation, or at the very least telephone calls and emails. Because one thing I've learned about Helena is that or at least the state capitol, is that it's a numbers game. It depends less on logic, usually, than it depends on how many warm bodies you've got there or how many emails or other messages are sent to the state legislatures. Well, thank you very much.
Is it still on? Hello? Okay. It is 1 o'clock, and we respect your time. Some of you have to go back to work. Rob, me, whoever wants to stick around. I know some of you drove a long way. I don't want you to go away cheated, so we're going to talk a little. So we'll stick around and talk for as long as anybody wants to. And for those of you who need to go, thank you so much for showing up. And again, please fill out a survey quickly for us and tell us how we can improve these and what we can address in the future. Thank you very much.